Would you let a black widow spider bite you on purpose? What about sitting around and rating the smell of human farts? That's the kind of unhinged dedication to science I'm going to be talking about today. I'm Michael List 25, and today I'm counting down 25 shocking unusual experiments few know about. 25. Leonardo da Vinci's heart experiment. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't satisfied with painting masterpieces and sketching flying machines. Nope. He also needed to figure out exactly how blood moves through the human heart, and his method was wildly creative. He took a real heart valve and poured hot wax into it. Once the wax hardened, he had a perfect cast of the interior. From there, he created a thin glass replica and started pumping water mixed with grass seeds through the whole setup. The seeds allowed him to actually observe the flow patterns, showing him how the valve opened, closed, and regulated blood flow. This was the 1500s. There were no computers, no imaging technology, and medical knowledge was still largely based on guesswork. Da Vinci figured out cardiac mechanics using wax, glass, and plant seeds. The man reverse engineered the human heart in his workshop as if it were a side project between paintings. 24. The DHS USB stick trap. Here's a way to lose your job and compromise national security. Find a random USB stick in a parking lot and immediately jam it into your work computer. The Department of Homeland Security wanted to know how many people would actually do this, so they ran an experiment. Researchers scattered USB drives around the parking lots of government buildings and waited. No labels, no explanations, just mysterious thumb drives sitting on the pavement looking suspicious. 60% of people picked them up and plugged them right into their computers. When the drives had official-looking logos, the numbers jumped even higher. The whole point was to test security vulnerabilities, but really it proved that curiosity often beats common sense. Forget sophisticated hacking. All it takes to breach a secure network is a $5 flash drive in a parking lot. 23. The third wave experiment. A California history teacher got tired of his students asking how ordinary Germans could have followed the Nazis. So, in 1967, he decided to stop explaining and start demonstrating. He invented a fake movement called the Third Wave, and watched teens transformed into true believers in under a week. It started with strict posture rules and formal address. Students had to sit up straight to begin every statement with Mr. Jones. Pretty soon, they were throwing salutes in the hallways, banners went up, membership cards got passed around, and within 3 days, the experiment exploded from 30 students to over 200. Kids were skipping other classes to participate. Some started policing each other's behavior and reporting rule breakers. On day 5, the teacher pulled the plug. He gathered everyone together and revealed that the entire event had been a demonstration of how quickly authoritarianism can take root. The students were horrified. They'd gotten swept up without even realizing it. 5 days is all it took to build a movement nobody questioned. 22. The Hamilton family's ghost hunt. For 27 years, a family in Winnipeg held seances in their living room and wrote down everything that happened. I'm talking from 1918 all the way to 1945. That's not a phase, that's a lifestyle. The Hamiltons weren't weirdos in tinfoil hats. The father was a respected physician. The family had education, standing in the community, and absolutely zero embarrassment about trying to contact the dead. They ran their seances like lab experiments. When mediums produced something called teleplasm, this strange gooey substance that supposedly materialized during psychic sessions, the Hamiltons photographed it from multiple angles. Did they actually prove ghosts exist? Well, it depends on who you ask. Believers say the photos speak for themselves. Skeptics say it was staged. Either way, the Hamiltons left behind boxes and boxes of records, and the University of Manitoba thought it was interesting enough to preserve. A family spent nearly 3 decades hunting spirits in their own home, and a major university said, "Yeah, we'll take those files." Make of that what you will. 21. Professional fart smellers. Speaking of unusual scientific commitments, someone had to volunteer for this job. An actual peer-reviewed study was conducted to evaluate whether a device could reduce flatulence odor. Yes, that required professional fart judges. 16 volunteers ate pinto beans because those are famously good at producing gas. The researchers collected samples through rectal tubes and handed them off to 2 independent judges who rated the intensity of each smell to determine if the odor reduction device actually worked. This was a legitimate scientific study with methodology, controls, and peer review. Somewhere, a researcher had to write a grant proposal explaining why they needed funding to have people smell collected flatulence. And somewhere else, 2 judges had to put professional fart evaluator on their resumes. The things people volunteer for never ceases to amaze. 1 smart fella, he felt smart. 2 smart fellas, they felt smart. 3 smart fellas, they all felt smart. 20. The colonoscopy that changed psychology. Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize, and part of that journey involved making colonoscopies worse for some patients on purpose. Stay with me here. Kahneman wanted to understand how people remember painful experiences, so he studied patients undergoing the notoriously uncomfortable procedure. He split them into 2 groups. One group got a standard colonoscopy, unpleasant but over quickly. The second group had their procedure extended by several extra minutes at the end, with the scope sitting there doing nothing. Here's the twist. The group with the longer, technically more uncomfortable procedure rated their experience as less terrible. Why? Because it ended on a less painful note. Kahneman discovered that our brains don't average pain over time. We remember the peak moment and the final moment, and that's it. He called it the peak end rule, and it changed how we understand memory, perception, and why endings matter more than we think. 19. Radioactive breakfast cereal. During the 40s and 50s, MIT partnered with Quaker Oats on an experiment that nobody bothered to explain to the participants. They fed radioactive oatmeal to children at a Massachusetts state school without getting consent from the kids or their parents. The subjects had no idea what they were eating. Researchers wanted to track how the body absorbs certain nutrients, so they added radioactive tracers to the oatmeal and monitored the results. The children thought they'd joined a special science club with bonus meals and field trips. What they actually got was irradiated breakfast. The truth didn't come out until decades later. In 1998, Quaker Oats and MIT settled with over 100 former participants for $1.85 million. It remains one of the more disturbing examples of what happens when scientific curiosity outruns basic ethics. Informed consent? Never heard of her. 18. Mouse Utopia. What happens when you give mice everything they could ever want, including a cookie? The answer, they self-destruct. In the 60s, researcher John Calhoun built Universe 25, which is a habitat designed to be a mouse paradise. Equipped with unlimited food, water, bedding, and no predators, he started with 8 mice and let nature take its course. The population grew rapidly, eventually reaching 2,200 individuals. Then, everything fell apart. As the space became more crowded, the whole social order collapsed. Some mice turned violent. Others checked out entirely. They'd sit alone, grooming themselves for hours while the world burned around them. Females started abandoning litters. Males gave up on mating altogether. The basic drives that keep a species going? Gone. The population nosedived until there was nothing left. People love pointing to this experiment when they talk about what happens to overcrowded cities. Too many bodies, not enough purpose, and suddenly nobody knows how to function anymore. Calhoun's mice had 0 problems except that they had nothing to struggle against. Turns out, that's the only problem you need. 17. Cow butt eyes. Lions are apex predators, but apparently they're also easily fooled by arts and crafts. In Botswana, researchers tested whether painting large eye patterns on cattle rumps could prevent lion attacks. The theory was simple. Predators avoid prey that appears to be watching them. If a cow looks like it's staring you down from behind, maybe you'd pick an easier target. And it worked. Cattle with painted eyes were significantly less likely to get attacked than unpainted cows. The lions either thought they'd lost the element of surprise or didn't want to deal with something that seemed alert. Either way, a little paint saved lives. This is now being explored as a low-cost solution for farmers dealing with human-wildlife conflict. No fences, no guns, no expensive technology, just googly eyes on cow butts keeping everyone alive. 16. Birds that see magnetic fields. European robins migrate thousands of miles every year, and they do it by literally seeing the Earth's magnetic field. Scientists prove this by putting tiny goggles on birds. As one does. Researchers placed robins in specialized cages and manipulated their visual input to see how it affected navigation. When the bird's vision was sharp and unobstructed, they oriented themselves perfectly using their magnetic compass sense. But when researchers disrupted their visual system, the robins became completely disoriented. Turns out, robins don't sense magnetic fields, they actually see them. Their visual and magnetic systems are interconnected in ways we're still trying to fully understand. Meanwhile, us humans can barely navigate to the grocery store without GPS screaming directions at us. These little birds are flying across continents using superpowers we can't even detect. 15. The relationship predictor. Want to know if your relationship will last? Watch what happens when one of you gets excited about something small. Researchers discovered they could predict with remarkable accuracy whether couples would stay together based on one simple observation: how partners respond to each other's bids for connection. If one person notices something that thrills them, like a beautiful sunset, an interesting article, or even a cool bird, and shares it with their partner, the response matters enormously. Partners who reacted with interest, engagement, or shared enthusiasm were far more likely to maintain lasting relationships. Those who responded with indifference, dismissal, or distraction, not so much. Grand romantic gestures matter way less than whether you actually turn toward your partner when they want your attention. 14. Simulating the afterlife. People who flatline and come back often tell the same story of floating above their body, moving through some kind of tunnel, seeing light, and feeling weirdly calm about the whole thing. It happens so often that researchers have started wondering whether they can actually recreate such a thing. Enter dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which is a powerful hallucinogen. When scientists gave it to volunteers, the trip reports read like a greatest hits album of near-death accounts. Same tunnel, same light, same sensation of slipping out of your own skin. Now, there are two possibilities here. Either DMT mimics whatever the brain does when it's shutting down, or the brain actually floods itself with something similar when the end comes. Nobody knows for sure which one is true. What scientists do know is that they can now give someone a chemical and watch them describe an experience that used to require, almost dying. 13. The Bittersweet Playlist. You know that sad song you've played 100 times? You're not alone. And the numbers are kind of wild. Researchers tracked listening habits and found that bittersweet tracks are replayed significantly more than any other type of music. 790 plays on average for songs that mix happy and sad. Mellow, relaxing stuff clocks in around 515, and pure feel-good anthems, they barely hit 175. The stuff that should make us feel good gets the least attention. Nobody's entirely sure why this happens, but the theory is that we're not actually chasing happiness when we hit repeat. We're chasing something that feels real. A song that's purely upbeat doesn't stick the same way. It's nice, and then it's over. But that song that aches a little, that one follows you around. So yeah, your obsession with that one melancholy playlist isn't a character flaw. Your brain simply prefers the complicated stuff. Bittersweet Symphony is a great song, speaking of songs with bittersweet. It's a bittersweet symphony this ride. 12. The sacrificial lakes. Somewhere in Canada, there are 58 freshwater lakes that researchers have been intentionally contaminating since the 60s. They're dumping pollutants into clean water to see what breaks first. The experimental lakes area exists because you can't replicate an entire ecosystem in a laboratory. So scientists got their hands on real lakes and started introducing fertilizers, pesticides, mercury, and even antidepressants, anything they wanted to study. Then they watched the fish populations crash, the algae bloom, and the food chains unravel. It sounds brutal, but there is a reason for it. Everything we know about acid rain, algae blooms, and pharmaceutical runoff came from poisoning these lakes first. The research has shaped environmental laws across North America. Wreck a few lakes now, or wreck all of them later through ignorance. Canada picked option 1. 11. Slime mold cosmology. Slime molds are single-celled organisms that somehow solve complex problems despite having no nervous system whatsoever. Put one in a maze with food at the end, and it will find the shortest path every time. It extends, explores, optimizes, and connects resources with startling efficiency. Researchers noticed this behavior looked familiar. The way slime molds network resources resembles the filaments of dark matter that connect galaxies across the cosmos. Scientists developed a slime mold algorithm and used it to model the large-scale structure of the universe. A blob of goo that lives on rotting logs helped us understand how galaxies are connected. If that doesn't make you question everything about intelligence and complexity, then nothing will. The universe's blueprint was hiding in pond scum. 10. High fructose weight gain. In 2010, Princeton scientists wanted to know if all sugars affect the body the same way. They fed one group of rats regular table sugar and another group high fructose corn syrup. Both groups consumed the exact same number of calories. The rats drinking high fructose corn syrup got fatter, not just a little fatter either. They packed on significantly more weight and started showing early signs of metabolic problems that the sugar group never developed. Same calories, totally different outcomes. The research suggested that the type of sweetener matters just as much as the amount you consume. High fructose corn syrup seems to change how your body processes and stores fat in ways that regular sugar doesn't. Considering that stuff shows up in almost every processed food on grocery store shelves, the implications are pretty unsettling. 9. Raccoon masterminds. Raccoons aren't trash bandits. They're legitimately brilliant problem solvers with memories that would put most humans to shame. In controlled experiments, researchers presented raccoons with 13 different locks and watched what happened. The animals cracked 11 of them in fewer than 10 attempts. When scientists rearranged the locks or flipped them upside down, the raccoons adapted without missing a beat. Same solutions, different orientations, no problem. The most impressive part? They remembered how to open those locks 3 years later. Not 3 days, 3 years. That's long-term memory and adaptive intelligence that challenge assumptions about what non-primate mammals are capable of. Next time you see a raccoon rifling through your garbage, know that you're looking at an animal smart enough to defeat complex security systems. And if you're Rocket Raccoon, make a lot of guns. 8. Editing human embryos. In 2017, scientists did something that had never been done before. They successfully edited the DNA of human embryos to remove a gene responsible for a deadly heart condition. Researchers from Oregon Health and Science University, working with the Salk Institute, used precise gene editing techniques to correct defective DNA in embryos that would have inherited a potentially fatal cardiac disease. The edit worked. Faulty gene was gone. The embryos were allowed to develop for 5 days under careful observation before the experiment was halted because ethical boundaries had to be maintained. But the proof of concept was established. We can now, in theory, prevent inherited diseases before a person's even born. The implications are staggering, and the ethical debates haven't stopped since. This is medicine at its most powerful and its most complicated. The technology exists. The question is how we use it. 7. Free will under the microscope. Benjamin Libet wanted to know when a decision actually happens. Not when you think you decided something, when your brain physically commits to an action. So, in 1983, he wired people up and told them to press a button whenever they felt like it. Simple enough. Here's where it gets weird. The brain began to rev up for movement about half a second before anyone reported wanting to move. The electrical activity was already there, building, preparing, and then the person would say, "Now I've decided." But the brain had beaten them to it. So, who's really in charge here? You feel like you're choosing to lift your finger, but your neurons fire first. Maybe what we call a decision is your conscious mind getting a memo about something that's already in motion. Philosophers have been losing sleep over this for 40 years. Nobody's settled it yet, but if Libet was right, the voice in your head that thinks it's running the show might be narrating events after they happen. 6. America's Camel Army. The US Army once tried to solve the desert problem by importing camels from the Middle East, and Congress actually approved this. Money was allocated, officers were dispatched overseas, and a herd of camels eventually landed in Texas. On paper, it was a genius move. These animals hauled more weight than horses, went days without needing water, and crossed rocky terrain that would have wrecked a mule. The equipment proved what everyone hoped. Camels were built for the American Southwest. The soldiers? Not fans. Camels reeked. They spit. They made weird noises and sent horses into full panic mode whenever they got close. Nobody wanted to work with them, no matter how practical they were. Then, the Civil War started. And suddenly, the government had bigger concerns than experimental pack animals. The program got scrapped, the camels got auctioned off or let loose, and for years afterward, people reported seeing wild camels wandering throughout the desert like some kind of fever dream. Great idea, terrible execution. The animals weren't the problem. We were. 5. Pavlov never used a bell. Everything you think you know about Pavlov's famous experiment is probably wrong. First, he never used a bell. The popular version has Pavlov ringing a bell before feeding the dogs until they learn to salivate at the sound. Makes for a nice story, but it's not accurate. Pavlov considered bells too imprecise for proper experimental control. What he actually used were careful measured tones of specific durations, along with metronomes and occasionally mild electric shocks. His focus was on understanding conditioned reflexes with scientific precision, measuring digestive responses to controlled stimuli. The bell thing came from mistranslations and oversimplifications that spread through psychology textbooks over the decades. So, if you've been picturing a guy with a bell and some drooling dogs, the real version was much more technical and much less whimsical. Science is rarely as simple as the stories we tell about it. 4. Gatorade's disgusting origins. Way before Gatorade became a multi-billion-dollar sports drink empire, it was a disgusting concoction that test subjects compared to bodily fluids. In 1965, researchers at the University of Florida developed the formula to help the football team stay hydrated in brutal heat. The Gators. They aided the Gators? Gatorade? Huh? Alright. The head coach refused to let them experiment on the varsity team, so they were stuck testing on freshmen, who weren't allowed to play varsity under NCAA rules anyway. The feedback was brutal. Players described the early formula as tasting like urine or toilet bowl cleaner, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement. However, researchers kept tweaking and refining until they had something people could actually stomach. Those freshmen crushed it that season, and now Gatorade is everywhere. But somewhere in the history books, a bunch of college freshmen had to drink something that tasted like a public restroom to make it happen. Lemon lime was the first flavor. I don't like it. What's your favorite Gatorade flavor? Let me know in the comments below. My overall favorite, Fierce Melon, but I can't find that much anymore. So now there's that Zero Berry. That's a good one. 3. The Cloth Mother Experiment. Harry Harlow took baby monkeys away from their mothers and gave them 2 fake replacements. One was a cold wire with a bottle attached. The other was wrapped in soft terry cloth but had no food. Which one would an infant choose? Common sense says, go where the milk is. The babies disagreed. They clung to the cloth mother almost constantly, only darting over to the wire one when hunger got unbearable. Quick sip, then right back to the soft one. Every time. Food kept them alive, but it wasn't what they wanted. They wanted something that felt like comfort, something to hold on to. The wire mother could feed them, but it couldn't make them feel okay. Harlow caught a lot of heat for these experiments, and honestly, the whole setup is pretty grim when you think about it. But the results upended assumptions about what infants actually need to develop normally. Being held matters just as much as being fed, maybe more. 2. The man with a window in his stomach. In the 1800s, a Canadian fur trader named Alexis St. Martin was accidentally shot, and the wound never fully healed. What remained was a permanent hole in his stomach that doctors could see right through. For the next 12 years, he became a living laboratory. Physicians conducted experiments directly through the opening, dangling food on strings into his stomach and observing how digestion worked in real time. They watched gastric juices break down different foods, measured how long processes took, and documented findings that would shape physiology for generations. St. Martin reportedly wasn't thrilled about being a science project, and the experiments were often grueling, but he cooperated. And then he did something no one expected. Lived another 58 years after the initial injury. His accidental wound provided foundational knowledge about how the human digestive system actually works. Medical science advanced because one guy survived getting shot and let doctors poke around inside him for over a decade. They kind of do that at University of Florida too. They have cows with holes in them that they study. So, still kind of do that. 1. The Black Widow volunteer. Most people run screaming from Black Widow spiders. Alan Walker Blair ran toward one with forceps and a notebook. It was the 1930s, and Blair was a physician frustrated by conflicting medical reports. Some sources said Black Widow bites were deadly. Others claimed they were no big deal. Blair figured there was only one way to settle the debate. He caught a spider, pinned it against his finger, and waited for the fangs to do their work. What followed was 48 hours of pure regret. The pain hit fast, burning, spreading, relentless. His muscles seized up, his abdomen went rigid. Breathing became a chore. Blair documented every miserable moment because that's what scientists do, even when they're writhing in agony. The wildest part? He'd planned to get bitten a second time. He figured maybe the first dose would act like a vaccine and protect him for round 2. After living through those 2 days, he threw that plan straight in the trash. Blair gave medicine its first proper documentation of what Black Widow venom actually does to a human body. He got his answer. He also learned that some questions aren't worth asking twice. From radioactive oatmeal to self-inflicted spider bites, scientists have never been afraid to push the boundaries of what's reasonable in the name of knowledge. Some of these experiments changed the world. Others prove that humans will do absolutely wild things if you call it research. What other experiments do you know about? Would you have partaken in any of these? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more bizarre stories about what people have done in the name of science, click here for 25 human experiments too disturbing to ignore. That's all for today. Hit that like button, subscribe with the notification bell if you haven't already. I'll catch you in the next one.